Welcome to the Proptech Pulse podcast, your inside look at the world of real estate technology. I'm your host, Kyle Hunter, here to guide you through the latest trends, expert insights, and game-changing tech shaping the real estate world. This is your go-to source for staying ahead of the ever-evolving industry. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Proptech Pulse. Very happy today to have Cory with Contre.ai. And I don't know if that's how you say it, but contracts, real estate, kind of goes hand in hand. I like it. So Cory, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Okay, well, my name is Cory Turnbull. I have been a real estate agent with a commercial focus for the better part of the last 15, 16, 17 years. I own a brokerage in Idaho. And so I have been pretty heavy in the prop tech real estate space for the better part of 6 years now. You know, we built some real estate prop tech in the past that was, very heavy machine learning, very heavy NLP. This was kind of the pre-AI world. And, I just fell in love with the tech and, know the space real well. So just kind of been trying to build around identifying gaps in the marketplace.
So just to make sure that we put it out there, Lone Wolf did partner with Contre as a partner to kind of help with our transaction management and some of those things that you guys do on a day in, day out basis.
Yes.
You've said Contre was born from real transaction pain. What's the specific moment that you may have realized, this can't continue to be a human-only process anymore? What can we do to kind of bring some new tools to the arena?
Yeah, I was actually talking to a friend of mine who owns multiple brokerages, and we were at a fundraising event, and she was super upset that they just came in and she had to just write a check for $10,000 for a missed seller credit on a contract. And, of course, my little brain starts running, going, that's not acceptable with, in today's day and age. And then I was talking to another luxury broker in California, and they were in the middle of a big lawsuit over an antique clock that was written into the contract as stays with the property. And when they went to the walkthrough, that thing was gone, and and it ended up being a very expensive piece of furniture. But it was just one of those things. It was like you kept seeing these things getting overlooked, and then I was personally doing a deal, and there were multiple things that were overlooked in these contracts on the other agent side, and I was just going, this can't be real. It's like there's so many tools available to help us get better at it, but obviously it has to be done responsibly and within the that kind of security measure environment. So we kind of started building towards that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. We hear stories as well. A lot of times where the contract, you have the notes, the free form section where there's things that are added, and a lot of times those get overlooked. It's really just about making sure all the boxes are checked and the dates are filled. But, what about the extra pieces that, go in there that sometimes get slipped in? Obviously, with the buyer broker agreements and some of the changes that have impacted the industry, we have to really be aware of that. And I know that is an area that sometimes AI gets overused, or I should say can help supplement the human mistakes that are oftentimes found. Real estate professionals, there's tons of AI right now. I mean, everywhere you look, whether it's someone doing Claude code or all of the tech providers generating AI tools and things like that. What problem did you intentionally decide not to solve? Like, what did you look at and say, you know what, there's so many things out there. We're not going to try to do that. We're really going to focus on this.
Yeah, we made sure to, we're not focusing on the lead generation, the CRM kind of stuff. That's not our wheelhouse. Like, our wheelhouse is analyzing contracts and identifying, compliance issues, risks, creating timelines based on the day 0 versus day 1, because I've seen that, that issue just comes up so much, with things like earnest money and stuff are based off of off of the execution date, or, like in the contract, sometimes it'll be written agreement date. And then you realize that, if the seller signs on, or the buyer signs on the 15th and the seller signs on the 17th, then technically the 18th is day one of the contract. And so, we kind of started to address that problem. And then we just kept hearing from more people that, like in states like California and stuff that are heavy disclosures, it could be 100+ pages. And, we're not sitting at the table with our clients like we used to, and sitting down and going through the documents saying, hey, here's what this means, sign here. Here's what this contract means, you sign here. It's kind of just that DocuSign and figure it out, and sometimes it's 100 pages. And then, kind of in those secondary documents is where a lot of the landmines lie, things like the title reports and the HOAs. And there seems to just be a bunch of gray area of, who's responsible for reading the HOA and, and relaying those things. Is that the client's responsibility, or is that the agent's? It kind of varies per state. And so we kind of made sure that to focus directly on that portion of contract analysis, and, just providing more transparency up front significantly helps reduce issues down the road.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, Cory, this is why a lot of times folks will get worried about AI or technology, or, someone coming in and disrupting and displacing agents as the representative of buyers and sellers. And I think what you just highlighted really points out why that's just so far from being, from happening. When buyers and sellers that don't do this on a day in, day out basis go to make one of their biggest transactions ever, in many cases, their biggest of their lifetime, there's too many potential potholes that can really impact that decision and that process. And so having the agent and relying on someone who understands and knows the industry is important. But at the same time, some of those agents, even if they're a veteran agent, sometimes they're not catching everything, and there's mistakes, to your point, that are getting in there, and having some sort of tool to help you catch that before it gets to a bigger issue is super valuable. And I think something that is really ripe for making some good changes right now in the industry. So, kudos to identifying that and using that. Speaking of that, you've spent years inside of brokerage operations. What are some of the biggest risks that are underestimated today, whether it be by changes that are happening, or new things that are being added in to the way real estate is transacted?
I think there's a couple pieces on this. I think number one is that clients have more data and more access to data than they've had in their entire lives. I mean, you can say whatever you want about the Zillow's estimates and the realtor things, but if you go to 3 sites and you get a valuation of your property going in, and then you come in with an idea, say you just pick the median, like, and an agent comes in, they'll do their own CMA, and it's kind of like this balance of these clients, they're more prepared than they've ever been. It's just the data's there. I think that's a big issue. So then, that kind of opens up this thing of, maximum transparency, I think, is owed at this point in technology. Is, you should be able to tell them, here's the 10 things in your HOA that could be concerning. Here's what these title reports mean. This easement is, this one doesn't really mean that much. This one's a little bit more significant, just those kind of things. And I can say 100% honest that, there's multiple deals. I just, it's just been like fingers crossed that, no landmine shows up, or, that this doesn't matter, but it's like, you look at some of these HOAs, they're 100 and something pages, that kind of stuff. And I think this whole process of, all the companies, all the consolidation in the real estate market is giving agents, like 500,000 agents or whatever it is now, more access to technology and more access to tools that a brokerage my size, or a brokerage of 100 or 200 agents, has a really hard time spending that kind of money to get this technology. And so that was kind of what we built, was to help them get the technology that the big guys offer for, the price of a cup of coffee.
Enjoying the Proptech Pulse podcast? Don't miss a beat. Hit the subscribe button and stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes. And hey, if you're loving the content, leave us a review. It really helps us grow and reach more real estate pros like you. Also, don't forget to follow us on our social channels. We're sharing tips, trends, and behind-the-scenes content you won't want to miss. Find us on all the social platforms at Get Elwolf.
No, and I love that point. I mean, bringing it, obviously, large conglomerates, large companies have tools and things that they offer, and that's kind of their value prop. Where a lot of the other agents and smaller individuals still need to be able to compete, and having something that kind of fits into their market. I want to go back to something you said, though. Consumers having greater tools at their hands, because again, I know we all went through the time frame of Zillow and the Zestimate, and the seller is going to know or have some sort of idea, whether wrong or right, on what they feel that their property's worth without having the full information pack. With AI, with most users, or a lot of consumers nowadays going into LLMs and creating and doing a lot of research on their own, how has that changed how agents and brokers today approach the process when they're dealing with them? Or what kind of advice would you have for agents that are trying to tackle that?
Well, I think a lot of it is, it's, I hate to say this, but there's a lot of false confidence that you get from like traditional AI models. And, if you're going to a chat GPT and you're just saying, what's the average home price of a 3,000 square foot home in Dallas, Texas? It's going to give you a bunch of numbers, but are they completely accurate? Probably not. It's just a amalgamation of data that might not be recent, it might not be relevant, it might not fit the experience, but there's so much security risk in using these traditional AI models as a sounding board. Like California, and I know some other states are getting ready to pass legislation on it too, that uploading a contract with personal information of a client is subject to a heavy fine. And so if you go in there and you upload a purchase and sale contract and just say, hey, just summarize this for me and give me some deadlines, it'll be able to summarize it for you. But to expect an LLM to go in and be able to do the logic of day zero versus day one, and then find the 7 or 8 dates in there, it's a big ask. And they still hallucinate a lot. They'll obviously get better, but then that information that you just put into the system becomes training data for these LLM models. So who knows what they do with it, but it opens your clients up to some unnecessary privacy risks.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. And again, it goes back to why agents know their market. They should be the SME in whatever market that they're in. And that's really why buyers and sellers are going to continue to work with them, because they know about the individual properties. In many cases, they've been in them. They understand the neighborhoods and the markets, and that's part of the ability to guide customers to the right properties that meet their criterion. So, certainly feel that it has. On the flip side, though, when it comes to the actual AI accountability from an agent, what I feel like there's a lot of agents that are using it and they're taking things, sometimes slop, they're taking things and just running with it. What is your suggestion for preventing agents from actually, putting out their stuff without going in and making sure that what they're putting out there is accurate and to the standards that they should be holding themselves?
I think it revolves around a lot of training. I think there's a lack of training with this. This technology's just come on like a freight train. It's, everybody tries to compare it to the .com era. I think it's significantly faster, and it's got a lot more consequence when you go out there and like you type into something in ChatGPT and it'll give you some numbers, you copy paste that, you put it on your social media, and then you realize it might be wrong. And so there's better ways to do it. Like you can train agents and you can do all these different things. It takes time and it takes knowledge to learn these things. I'm not saying that you can't do it, and it can be incredible, but I think they need to learn to do it correctly. hundreds of hours of, watching YouTube videos and learning how to train your agents to do the things that they need to do, or, bringing in experts to kind of inform them of, number one, the risk, because if you're out there putting out incorrect materials, you're going to look like an idiot. It's as simple as that. And a lot of people will blow over it, but then all it takes is one person that understands you're incorrect, and you're kind of shot yourself in the foot there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think everyone kind of gets caught up in that. And, I know that AI does a lot of work for you and it helps out. Yep. And there's a lot of good that it can do, but to try to just trust it and just go all in, I feel like there's always that human element at this point that you need to verify, make sure that what you're putting out there is quality, and to make sure that, there's some sort of oversight in what you are, putting your name on. So I know that's super important. I want to pivot a bit to some of the reactions that you see from brokers. You're working with brokers that are, in many cases, maybe less tech forward than some of the point of large companies that have done this and built a lot of things. What's some of the first reactions like when you are showing them and they're experiencing what they see with what your solution can do? Is it fear? Is it excitement? Are they skeptical of it? Like, what's some of the feedback that you've got after you've shown some of these brokerages what it can do for them?
A lot of the times we're getting a lot of the feedback that'll be like, well, our agents are already, we're already using ChatGPT, or we're using Claude for some of these workflows already. And, that is, to me, it's just terrifying. It's like, all right, it's great at certain things, but number one, a client does not want an email written to them by AI. Like, as an agent, there's some very specific things. Like, you can send out market reports, you can send out some other stuff, but the emails, the text, they need to be personalized. It just sounds lazy when you just send out an AI thing that, you send it to 50 of your clients that says, it's the same thing, but just like a tiny personalization in there. But a lot of the brokers, there's a bit of trepidation still in a lot of what they do. It's, oh, we have a compliance team, or we offer top-notch service to our clients. And then you give them a transaction, and they have one of their agents send out just a report. Like, we do every document is a one-page report, and then we have a full document. But if they just send them a single document that says, here's your responsibilities, here's your timeline of what you need to do, here's a quick summary of the document, here's what you're responsible for paying, those kind of things, all that stuff's in the purchase and sale contract, but it kind of, you just go it through real quick. It's checkbox. You're on a digital sign, you're checking and you're moving, and then you get it to the clients, and the clients are going, well, this is pretty cool. I've never had anybody give me a list of, and then some of the top agents that we've chatted with in the country, like the top 5%, they have an assistant that'll go build a sheet like this. It takes them an hour, 2 hours. Our system, it takes a couple minutes, and this, it's a personalized report. It's got your logo, your heading, all that kind of stuff. And so it's exciting to see from the broker's perspective, learning what the real problems are, because, we've come across, it's all of them have a different need at this point. It's like we have some of them that are, that love the concept of the initials, the signatures, and the dates being verified on every single document. It's just that's a quick thing that we do. And then other ones want to know specific stuff about, make sure the commission level is above 1% or above $1,000 flat fee or $2,000 flat fee. And if it's not, notify us instantly. And so we've kind of just been making sure that we build the tools around what we're seeing these issues are on the front lines from these brokers.
Great point. I mean, I want to get back to one thing you just mentioned, because it's pretty, it sounds cool. Do you think that consumers will eventually expect AI generated transaction summaries or transaction summaries similar to what you guys produce? Because that sounds pretty cool. I mean, the ability to have just kind of a, here is your update, buyer or seller, on what's going on, and they can rely that, okay, this is something that is generated and I know what's going on. Because I think a lot of the surveys talk about, that's kind of some of the complaints is, a lot of times in this process, buyers and sellers are, feel a bit lost on
Yep.
what's actually going on. I know it's been a few years since I've made a transaction, but, just constantly having to track down, wait, is this inspection going on? What's going on? What's the
Yeah.
next step? What's happening? So tell me how you feel about that.
I think it's going to be almost expected here soon because, like if you have broker or you have agent A and agent B, and agent A gets the contract done, says, okay, get your inspection signed, and, they check back in a couple weeks. Hey, how's the inspection going? That's pretty minimal. But then all of a sudden, if you're giving them a report that says, okay, here's, like we have a full report that regenerates after every document. So it cross-checks everything, dates, addresses, signatures, and then looks for conflicting reports within each document. So it'll tell you, here's a one-page summary. Here's a quick summary of the title report. You want to look into that. Here's some HOA stuff. Maybe the reserves are subpar, but if you're comparing apples and apples, it's like, I'm big on this issue of transparency now. The clients deserve more, and they're going to get more. Like if the agents don't start doing more, I know people that are building tech to replace agents and replace transaction coordinators, through offering all these scenarios of, maximum transparency. Here's what every contract means. Here's what it says. Here's what it does. Those kind of things. So I do definitely think that it's the way that we will be moving forward as a real estate profession.
So that's a great leads me into my last question, which in 5 years, what do you feel the industry is going to look like, and how does Contre actually fit into that? How do you feel like it's going to change where the industry is going?
Yeah, man, I have to give an honest answer, but I think a lot of the lower level agents are going to be in trouble. It's the really good agents are really good for a reason, and then you've got the people that come in, get a real estate license. We're going to sell 2 or 3, 4 houses a year. We're going to do all this stuff. They really don't know what they're doing. They don't know what to look for in a title report, because real estate training is, like up here, it's a couple months or it's a couple weeks, and you can have a real estate license. And there's no real education to be able to understand, what an HOA says, what do these disclosures mean? What do water rights mean? All these different things. And so I think the lower level agents, are going to be in trouble. Just because the way technology is evolving, you see Claude put out new tools every couple of weeks that almost destroy an entire industry, finance and insurance and law and that kind of stuff. And I think, I think the agents and brokers have to really sharpen their pencils a lot here and try to get, dig their heels in, figure out exactly what their clients want, and be able to provide that and more, and, give them complete transparency. Because like NASDAQ did a study a couple of years, or within the last year or two, and it was like 33% or 32.6% of home buyers are overwhelmed with paperwork. And it's like, you go into a contract or you go into a transaction overwhelmed, you're kind of looking for ways out. You're looking for anything that gives you an excuse to bounce. It's like, if you get one of those crazy ex-girlfriends, you're like, well, she's pretty, but she's a little nuts. And yeah, I think this is my exit strategy. So, it's probably the best analogy, but.
Yeah. Well, Cory, appreciate you joining today. Thank you for the partnership with Lone Wolf. And we look forward to what's to come in the future.
All right, man. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Proptech Pulse podcast. Looking to take your real estate game to the next level? Check out our cutting edge tools. Visit lwolf.com to learn more and see how we can help you succeed. I'm your host, Kyle Hunter, and I'll catch you next time as we continue exploring the future of real estate together. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and stay connected. Until then, keep innovating and thriving in the world of real estate.